What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Lightroom tutorial video. In today's video, we are going to be talking about exporting your photos from Adobe Lightroom Classic. Now, I know it seems a little odd to go straight from an import video to an export video without talking about developing developing your photos in between, but I felt that this was a good transition from my last video to now because I feel like it's a good round trip. So don't worry, we'll talk about developing photos here very soon, but I thought for today's video we would just simply talk about some of the things you want to keep in mind when exporting your photos out of Adobe Lightroom. So there's a few different ways that you can export your photos out of Adobe Lightroom. The first way is simply to go up here and click on File and drop down to the Export option here. That's option number 1. Option number 2, over here in the Library module, simply right-click on the photo you want to export. And as you can see down here, we have a export option and several more options come up as well. I'll talk about these in just a second here. And the third option is to click on the photo that you want in the film strip, and when you right-click on it, there is the export window right there, and again, it pops up all these different export options. Now let's talk about these export options for just a second here. Some of these options are built into Lightroom. For example, you have burn full-size JPEGs, export to DNG, export for email. These are all options that Lightroom has built in when you start using the program. And as you can see down here, I have about a half dozen user presets, and these are different presets that I've developed for the different destinations that I upload photos to. And I'll talk about all of these in just a little bit here, but for now, let's just go up to the top here and click on Export and bring up the Export dialog window. And as you can see here, you have several different drop downs to work with. All of these drop downs have different functions that are part of the export process, and we'll go over these one by one here. Up here at the top, you have the option of where to export your photos. If I click on the drop down here, you can see it has hard drive selected. You could also export them for your email or to a CD or DVD. I think for the majority of us, we'll all be sending them to our hard drives. And then our first drop-down window here is Export Location. Now this is where you're going to tell Lightroom where to export your photos to. If I show you guys my file path here for my export, it goes to my storage drive, which is my D drive, and I have it going through a number of different folders to my shoot-proof folder, which is the folder I use for uploading my full resolution photos to my shoot-proof site. That's where folks can go and order prints from me. If you look over here at the Choose button, this is how you will navigate to where you want to export your photo. So for example, let's say I wanted to put this house finch photo into a different folder, like this wildlife folder. I would simply click on that, and that adds to your file destination path here, telling the photo where to go. So you would hit select folder, and as you can see here, the file path shows where the photo is going to go. And down here you have a few other options for where to tell Lightroom to put your photos. For example, in this put in subfolder option, if you check mark that, that will tell Lightroom to put your photos in a specific subfolder within this file path destination. So if you went into that wildlife folder after you exported the photo, there would be a subfolder in there. I don't really use this option. I am pretty organized as to where I want to keep my photos, so I usually don't use that option right there. There's a couple of other options down here, such as add to this catalog and add to stack. For the most part, I don't touch these options. I've never really played with them. Again, because I have a specific way of where I export my photos to. But just some other options down here for you guys to maybe play around with. And at the bottom of export location, we have the existing files drop down. And if we click on this, we have a few different options here. And this is for when you maybe want to re-export a photo. Say you made some changes to it and you want to re-export it. This will tell Lightroom what to do when you re-export that folder. I have it check marked to ask what to do. This is sort of just a fail-safe for me, so I don't accidentally overwrite a photo that I don't want to save over. And there's a few different other options here. You can do choose a new name for the exported file, where Lightroom will just automatically give it a new name, overwrite without warning. This is where you would just overwrite an old file without Lightroom warning you that that's about to happen. I would not recommend this. And skip. So I always have it check marked as ask what to do because I want Lightroom to give me that warning saying, hey, you're about to overwrite an old file. Now the next drop down is file naming. This is similar to the file renaming process that you go through during the import process in Lightroom. And to be perfectly honest, guys, I don't use this function anymore. I used to when I was first starting to use Lightroom. It's the same principle as renaming it during the import process. Simply, if you checkmark rename to, and you have all the different options here, custom name, date, file name, and as I said, guys, I don't use this option because I've already taken care of this during the import process. So I usually just leave this alone. There is an option here, and I'm not sure why this is really an option. I know Lightroom has the ability if you import a video clip into Lightroom, you can do some color grading to the clip. You can't use Lightroom as a video editing system because that's not what it was built for. But you still have those options if you do some color tweaks to a video file and you want to export it. You have the options here of what video format you wanted to export and what quality. But you know what, guys, like I said, I don't know anybody who uses Lightroom to do video work, so I don't touch this thing at all. Then we have file settings. This section will tell Lightroom what file format you want your photos exported to, the quality, and also, very importantly, what color space to export your photos as. If we click on the drop down, we have several different options to choose from here. JPEG is the universally accepted file type. It's the one that you use for 90 to 95% of all photos being shared out over the interwebs. For 95% of us, JPEG is probably the option you will need the majority of the time. That is the option that you will use to export to Facebook or Instagram or any other file sharing social media website, whatever you can think of here. Really quickly, let's jump over to quality. Now this is where you tell Lightroom what quality of photo you want exported out. If you were going to send this photo off to a lab, for example, to have it printed out, you would want it probably at 100% quality. If you're going to export to a website like Instagram or Facebook, you really don't need the quality that high because Instagram and Facebook put your photos through their compression system, so there's really no point at exporting it at 100% quality for those sources. If you're going to export a photo for Instagram or Facebook, I highly recommend dropping it down to about 80%. That still gives you a pretty good amount of quality and it'll look less compressed once you export it to those social media sites. Now, color space is pretty important because this will tell your computer how to display those images when you see them on your monitor or on your iPhone or Android device. The default export is Adobe RGB. This is a file format that is useful if you're going to be exporting your files for the purposes of printing, but if you're showing them over the internet, it's not necessarily the best option. Most monitors and smartphones are not really designed to show the RGB color space. So instead, what you would want to do is hit this drop down and then you have this option here, which is sRGB. Now this is the much more universally accepted color space for monitors, cell phone screens, and lots of other screens here. It is a simpler color space that is optimized for viewing photos and pictures and anything else on screens. So again, if you're going to be exporting just for viewing your photos online, this is the color space option I would choose. If you're going to be printing, I would select Adobe RGB. There's also Pro Photo RGB. This is for like those big honkin' printers. I really can't foresee an option where most of you would probably want this option unless you did have one of those big printers at your house. I do have a Canon printer, so for my prints, I will select Adobe RGB. But if I'm exporting to the web, sRGB all the way. Now you also have the option over here to limit the file size. And this is a good idea if you want to save space on your device or if you have a limited amount of space for uploads. Most of the time I don't worry about this. Then our next drop down is image sizing. Now this is pretty important if you are exporting for Facebook or Instagram. So let's say, for example, you wanted to export to Facebook. We would click on resize to fit, and then when we go to this drop down, here you have lots of different options to tell Facebook how to export your photos. For exporting to Facebook, for example, we would click on long edge, and then down here with pixels, and remember you want to have pixels selected instead of inches because you are working with a monitor and a display size. It's much simpler to think of your photos in terms of pixels instead of inches. And Facebook likes its photos best when they are exported with a pixel size of 2048 pixels on the long edge and with a resolution of 240 pixels per inch. You don't need to worry about don't enlarge. In fact, I don't ever click this option for anything. So that is how you would export a photo for Facebook. If you wanted to do Instagram, how I do Instagram is instead of selecting long edge, I click on the drop down and go to short edge, and Instagram really likes photos that are exported with a long edge of 1080 pixels. And with Instagram, you can get away with a higher pixel resolution just because they don't quite compress photos the way that Facebook does. So I usually go with a 300 pixels per inch resolution. So very just short and dirty rundown of image sizing, but I figure most folks are thinking about exporting for social media sites. So good thing to keep in mind here. This is a very important section. Then our next section down here is output sharpening. Now, if you are outputting a photo for the web, this is a decent option to remember. If you check mark it here, you have these two different drop downs pop up. If we click on this one here, it has three different options: screen, matte paper, glossy paper. If you are using Lightroom's export function like I do, you're probably just going to want to go with screen selection. As for amount, I find it varies for which social media platform I want to export for. If I'm going to export for Lightroom, I will usually do standard. If I'm going to export for Instagram, I usually do low. And that's just because of the different ways that the social media sites compress their photos when they're putting them through their processing system. And then you have metadata. Now this tells Lightroom what metadata to include when you export your photos. There are several different options. If you click on this drop down here, you can export with copyright only, you can export with copyright and contact info only, all except camera raw info. Again, lots of different options here. I usually export with all metadata. However, there are a couple of things that I check mark to have removed. As you can see here, I have my personal info removed and I remove location info. Now, I don't usually record my location info anyway, but I have this check marked just to be certain. And then you can also write keywords to the export as well. I don't usually worry about that because once I export the photos, I'm not really worried about keywording. Watermarking. Now, there is some debate out there about whether or not you should include a watermark on your photos when you export. For some people, they don't want to see a watermark. They find it distracting. For other folks, it is a way to show off their brand and say, hey, this is my work. Come check me out. For exporting to social media, I have watermark checkmarked. And if I go to this drop-down menu here, I have two different options, my Facebook watermark and Facebook watermark 2. This is also the same option that I have checkmarked for exporting to Instagram. And the reason I have two different options here is because watermark 2 is simply an update that I did to my watermark a while ago. You also have a simply copyright watermark, which just gives it a simple copyright your name to the photos. But as I mentioned, I have my own watermarks here. And then you have the option to click on edit watermarks. I'm not going to get into this in this video because I feel like this video is already taking too long. I may do another video on editing your watermarks in the future, but you do have that option. And then the final option is the post-processing dropdown. Now this option gives you the ability to do other things with the photo once you have exported it from Lightroom. This dropdown shows the different options that you have when you export your photos out of Lightroom. As you can see here, several different options here. I believe when you start using Adobe Lightroom Classic, Open in Adobe Photoshop is the default setting, but I haven't had to do that for a long time. There are other options here. You can open up in a file explorer, or you can open it up in a different application. I have do nothing selected because for me, once I've exported from Lightroom, I'm done with the photo. So that is a rundown of all the different drop downs that you have for exporting out of Lightroom. Really quickly, let's just touch on the presets window over here. This is where you can go to if you have different presets developed for different exporting purposes. As I have talked about, I have a few different options for Facebook. I have a different option for Instagram. I have a different option for Shootproof, which is my online gallery. I have a different option for Etsy, which I also have an online store for. And again, I will get into presets in a different video, but this is the section where you have your presets set up. So let's say I want to quickly have a preset ready to go for exporting my photos. I would checkmark which preset I want, and as you can see, it automatically sets up the export process for me in the drop downs here. So I have all of my different options selected, and I am ready to go. So once we are ready to export, we just go down here and hit export, and it will pump out the photo and send it away to its destination. Now let's say for whatever reason I wanted to re-export this photo. If I right click on it and go to export, and I'm just going to use the export preset that I used when I sent the photo out, if I click on that, it's going to pop up this warning here. And remember where I was talking about how I had that preset warning selected? Well, that is what that preset was for. This warning tells me that I have already exported that file and it is sitting somewhere on my computer. Now, I can tell it to overwrite that file with those changes. If I deliberately wanted to overwrite this file with changes, I can tell it to skip, which this is come in handy if you are exporting a bunch of photos out of Lightroom. You can skip the ones that have already been exported. And finally, you can tell Lightroom to export with unique names, and this will simply export the file with a different name on it. So that is the basic rundown of exporting out of Lightroom. Guys, I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you did, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. Make sure you subscribe. I've got more tutorial videos coming down the pipeline here, and I will see you guys in the next video.